Well, in 2011 I made a tour of the world for my sabbatical year. The purpose was to track the diffusion, the dissemination of the Italian guitar repertoire in the world. And that was successful. So I was in Australia, in the United States, in South Africa, in India, in some countries of Europe. And you can see that all over the world, the Italian guitar repertoire, the ancient and also the one of the 19th century, is very, very studied, and also with the musicians, composers of the 20th century, like Castelnuovo-Tedesco. So we'll listen to the opinions of John Griffiths, who is the director of the Department of Ancient Music of the University of Melbourne, Australia, and also the opinion of David Isaacson, speaking about Castelnuovo-Tedesco, related to my experience about it. That's all. So have a nice listening and watching. Okay, so we are in the
Early Music Studio at the University of Melbourne.
In the studio of Professor John Griffiths.
That's right.
And this is a meeting to discover the diffusion of Italian guitaristic repertoire also in Melbourne, because we are in Australia, Melbourne.
Yes.
So, what about your experience in ancient music, Italian ancient music?
Okay, in the repertory of the lute and the lute family, the chitarrone, tiorba, and also the five-course chitarra spagnola, there are so much of the original repertoire is Italian. So we have, and largely through firstly through the editions of Chilesotti at the end of the 19th century. There was already for guitarists, from a guitarist's point of view, this repertoire became known from the work of Chilesotti at the end of the 19th century, some very famous publications of his that were disseminated very widely around the world. They came here to Australia as well, helped by the orchestrations by Respighi. Then, when the actual revival of early instruments started, the publisher in Firenze, Spes, was very rapid to come up immediately with so many facsimile editions of Italian repertoire. And I have it, here on my shelves. It's full of it, and so Italian music is a very, very important part of what we perform. There are also modern editions and so forth. Both the ones that were done by Ruggero Chiesa that were published in Italy, but also other ones like Arthur Ness's complete edition for lute of the music of Francesco da Milano, which opened the whole world. Then in the 1980s, when people started to discover and rediscover the arch lute and the chitarrone, the first recordings of Kapsberger and composers like that, they were just magical for us. And so there is a lot of this music performed here. There are good collections in libraries. Lutenists like myself, we have large private collections, but our university library has nearly the entire Spes catalogue of Italian facsimiles.
Yes.
Also of early guitar music, of not only five-course guitar, and also some of the early 19th century stuff, not in tablature but in notation, that they published. So that was very significant. But it wasn't the first kind of guitar music of Italian guitar music that we knew about here. It didn't come in chronological order. I mean, we started off when I was starting to play the guitar. I think the very first piece that I ever played on the guitar was by Carcassi.
Oh,
and
which
so,
one?
It was
A major studio.
My father had the 3 volumes that were published by Schott of the method, but my father only had the 3rd volume in a German edition, and it was called Schweizerlied.
Ah.
So
another name.
No. Well, this came about initially through my work in Spanish music and a desire to work on Naples during the period when it was under Spanish control, and to examine exchange and interaction between Italian and Spanish musicians. And so to do this, Dinko Fabris and I decided we would do this work together, and so we've done our first volume here of the most extraordinary lute music from Naples. Music, in Italy, in general, the history of the lute is known from Rome and further to the north, very little in the south. And so when we discovered this music and started to play these Fantasie by Fabrizio Dentice, by Giulio Severino, and some of the other composers, it's extraordinary. It's in fact, there's a line in the development of Italian music that starts with Italian lute music, certainly, that started with Francesco da Milano, and it actually finished with John Dowland.
Mm-hmm.
John Dowland, of course, came into contact with all of this music through John Baptiste Bessart, when Bessart was in Rome, and when Dowland came to study in Rome, and probably both of them worked with Lorenzino da Roma. But between Francesco da Milano and Lorenzino, there was a gap, a missing part. And Fabrizio Dentice is that missing link. And this is the thing that we've discovered. And so this edition here has both entablature and modern notation, as well the music of these composers. Now, of course, this opens a door to many other things, and so the next project that we did has been looking at lute and song, and connected with the birth of opera and the lute as a continuo instrument, and it's come out with a new facsimile edition of the lute book of Cosimo Bottegari. Bottegari was a professional singer who accompanied himself on the lute, and it's very interesting because the way he made arrangements of madrigals just for the practical business of singing is totally different to the way that Vincenzo Galilei came about it. Now, of course, Vincenzo Galilei had a formal connection with the Camerata of Giovanni Bardi, but I get the feeling that Cosimo Bottegari's music is a better depiction of exactly what was going on.
So Cosimo Bottegari was from
Firenze.
Firenze.
Yeah, but the other important link is that when we discovered this music here, we discovered it mainly in a manuscript in Cracovia, and there's an inscription in the back of the manuscript in Cracovia, a manuscript of Neapolitan origin, to tell us that the compiler of this lute music was a castrato. that opened the door, because here as well we have, if you like, the soundtrack to Caravaggio's famous paintings of the lute and lutenists, because what Caravaggio's lutenist was doing was something very similar to Cosimo Bottegari. He was singing the cantus line from the songs, from madrigals by Villet, from Cipriano de Rore, and reading the bass part and making a continuo part in a way that was exactly parallel to what was happening in Florence with the Camerata.
Okay.
We grew up on the Segovia repertoire.
That's true.
Now there was a few pieces of Castelnuovo-Tedesco there, the Tarantella, Platero y Yo, and things like that. But it was really more when, I think that Italian music in the international sense got its biggest boost when Siegfried Behrendt, who was then the Deutsche Grammophon recording artist alongside Narciso Yepes, did one complete LP of Italian guitar concertos. The first time we heard the development section of the first movement of the Giuliani A major, and then another LP of solo Italian guitar music that went right through from from Chilasotti transcriptions of ancient airs and dances through to Bussotti's Ultima Rara. They didn't come till the late 60s, early 70s, and maybe some of that didn't get to South Africa as easily as here, but it still was not it was not common fare.
Yes, and I think we got some of the other influences, of course, were the travelling guitarists who would come from Europe and introduce new repertoire. And of course there was a whole flurry of excitement in the guitar community. Oh, where can we get hold of that music? And of course that was the way the music became disseminated. Beppe being one of the exponents who really brought a very fresh focus on the music of Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco. And encouraged people to start thinking more broadly and looking at some of his repertoire. I remember how amazed I was when I visited Beppe and I just found this huge pile of music. I said, well, what is this? 24 preludes and fugues and these other concertos and things which were just not available or not easily available. And just a whole feast of music which really, I think, had we known about it, we would have just engaged in it and started playing it. But of course, these things do happen in sort of seasons, and Beppe being a great exponent of the music of Castelnuovo-Tedesco is now starting a new wave of promoting his music, which is, I think the guitar community is really going to benefit from moving away from, we reached the stage, someone once described what we experienced as rent a program. And there was a certain sense, if you went to a guitar concert, you'd hear Asturias and you'd hear a couple of preludes, Villa-Lobos, and you'd hear, 2/3 of your program would be stuff you'd already heard at the last concert. And so I think what's happening is this opening up and this bringing a concerted effort to promote the music of Castelnuovo-Tedesco is going to be a real...
Yes, I remember I played Variations à travers le siècle in Cape Town, variations, and also maybe Rondo. Rondo.
I think you did a few that were for the first time. You really brought it to our ears for the first time.
After the record, yes.